Along a single stretch of asphalt in northern British Columbia, at least 18 women and girls have been murdered or disappeared since 1969. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police officially recognize 18 cases. Indigenous advocates say the real number is closer to 40. Some of those women were last seen doing something as ordinary as walking to a friend's house or waiting by the shoulder for a ride home. How does a 725-kilometer highway swallow that many people over more than 5 decades without a single conviction in most of the cases? Over the next 20 minutes, you'll hear about 3 victims, 2 suspects investigators quietly circled for years, and 1 piece of physical evidence the RCMP sat on until 2012. Detail number 3 is the one that still haunts the families along Route 16. If you follow cases like this, subscribe. Dark Cases covers a new one every week. Now let's begin where the road begins. Highway 16 runs east to west across northern British Columbia, a 2-lane ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Rocky Mountains, past logging towns, through First Nations reserves, and out to the Pacific coast at Prince Rupert. On a map, it looks like any other rural route in Canada. On the ground, it is something else entirely. Locals do not call it Highway 16. They call it the Highway of Tears. And the reason is written in the names of the women and girls who set off along it and never came home. To understand what happened on this road, you have to understand the geography first. Between Prince George in the east and Prince Rupert in the west, there are roughly 725 kilometers of highway. In between there are small communities: Vanderhoof, Fort Fraser, Fraser Lake, Burns Lake, Houston, Smithers, Morrisatown, Hazelton, Kitwanga, Terrace. Many of these towns are majority Indigenous or sit adjacent to First Nations reserves. Public transit is minimal. Greyhound Canada ran a bus along the corridor for decades, but pulled service from Western Canada entirely in 2018. That left hitchhiking as the default method of getting from one town to the next, especially for young women without cars, without money, and without options. The first case widely counted on the Highway of Tears list is that of Gloria Moody. She was 26 years old, a member of the Nuksauk Nation. On October 25, 1969, she was last seen at a bar in Williams Lake. Her body was found the next day in a field outside town. Her murder is officially unsolved. Williams Lake sits south of Highway 16 on Highway 97, and for years her case was debated as to whether it belonged on the list at all. What is not debated is what came after her. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the pattern began to form, though nobody yet called it a pattern. Micheline Paré, 18, disappeared in 1970 near Hudson's Hope. Monica Ignace, 15, from Thornhill near Terrace, vanished in December 1974 while walking home from school. Her body was found 4 months later in a gravel pit. Her murder remains unsolved. Colleen Macmillan, also from the same corridor, was last seen in August 1974. Hitchhiking to a friend's house near 100 Mile House. Her body was discovered about a month later. For nearly 40 years, her case sat cold. And here is the first mini-truth about the Highway of Tears. For decades, these cases were not connected in any public way. Each police detachment worked its own file. Each family grieved alone. The pattern was invisible unless you were an Indigenous woman on that road, in which case you already knew. The cases kept coming. In 1989, Alberta Williams, a 24-year-old Gitano woman, disappeared after a night out in Prince Rupert. Her body was found near the highway a month later. In 1990, Delphine Nicol, only 16, vanished from Smithers while hitchhiking home to Telkwa. She has never been found. In 1994, Ramona Wilson, also 16, disappeared while trying to hitchhike from Smithers to a friend's house. Her remains were discovered nearly a year later near the Smithers airport. Her mother, Matilda Wilson, would spend the rest of her life demanding answers. She never got them. That same year, Roxanne Thiara, 15, was murdered near Burns Lake. And in 1995, Alicia Germain, also 15, was killed in Prince George. 4 teenage girls, 4 communities along the same road, 4 unsolved cases within a 2-year window. Even then, the RCMP did not publicly link them. Before we go further, a mini cliffhanger you need to sit with. By the mid-1990s, families in these towns were already telling each other something is happening here. Nobody in a position of power was listening. That would not change until the disappearance of a young woman whose case, for reasons that reveal a great deal about how these investigations were conducted, could not be ignored. Her name was Nicole Hoare. She was 25 years old, from Red Deer, Alberta. She worked as a tree planter, a common summer job for young Canadians moving through the northern interior. On June 21, 2002, she was hitchhiking east on Highway 16 out of Prince George, heading to Smithers to visit her sister. She was last seen near a gas station at the western edge of Prince George. She has never been found. Nicole Hoare was white. That fact matters, and every honest account of this case says so. Her disappearance drew national media attention in a way that the disappearances of Ramona Wilson, Delphine Nicole, Roxanne Thiara, and Alicia Germain had not. Search parties combed the highway, newspapers ran her photograph, and for the first time, the phrase Highway of Tears entered the Canadian vocabulary at the national level. That phrase, incidentally, is credited to Florence Naziel, an organizer of a 1998 vigil in Terrace, who used it to describe the sorrow families felt driving that road. After Nicole Hoare, the RCMP could no longer treat these as isolated files. In 2005, following the Highway of Tears Symposium in Prince George, a two-day gathering of families, First Nations leaders, and social workers, a report was released with 33 recommendations. Among them, a shuttle bus service, better lighting at highway rest stops, emergency phones, and a coordinated police task force. Most of those recommendations sat unimplemented for years. In 2005, the RCMP finally launched Project e-pana. Named after the Inuit goddess who cares for the souls of the dead, the project was tasked with investigating unsolved murders and disappearances along Highway 16, 97, and 5. Initially, e-pana considered 18 cases. That is the number the RCMP still officially uses. Indigenous organizations, including the Carrier Sakani Family Services, have long argued the true number is closer to 40, and possibly higher, once you include women whose disappearances were classified as runaways, overdoses, or suicides without adequate investigation. Here is where the case gets colder and stranger, because for years, e-pana investigators did in fact circle two suspects. Neither was ever charged with a Highway 16 disappearance. Both are now dead. That fact, that the men most closely examined by the RCMP for these crimes died before being brought to justice, is one of the reasons the Highway of Tears remains, in the words of one Prince George detective, a series of cases with theories, but not conclusions. The first suspect was Cody Legibokov. He was arrested in 2010 at the age of 20 after a conservation officer in Vanderhoof pulled over his pickup truck one November night and noticed blood on his legs. Inside a nearby wooded area, police found the body of 15-year-old Lauren Leslie. Legibokov was later convicted of 4 murders: Leslie, Jill Stachenko, Cynthia Moss, and Natasha Montgomery, all in and around Prince George. He remains one of Canada's youngest convicted serial killers. But investigators have repeatedly noted the timing does not fit for most of the older Highway of Tears cases. Legibokov was a child when many of those disappearances happened. The second name is Bobby Jack Fowler. And this is where we get to detail number 3, the piece of evidence the RCMP held for decades before it was finally matched. In September 1974, Colleen McMillan, the 16-year-old last seen hitchhiking to a friend's house, was murdered. Her body was found weeks later. Forensic evidence was collected at the scene, but in 1974, DNA analysis did not yet exist. That evidence was preserved. It sat in an RCMP evidence locker for 38 years. Bobby Jack Fowler was an American drifter from Oregon, a man with a long criminal history involving assaults on women. He worked in the roofing and construction trades, which brought him through British Columbia repeatedly in the 1970s. He was arrested in Oregon in 1995 after a woman escaped from a motel room where he had bound and beaten her. He was convicted and sentenced to 16 years. He died in an Oregon prison of lung cancer in 2006, still incarcerated. In 2012, the RCMP announced that DNA extracted from the preserved evidence in the Colleen McMillan case had been matched to Bobby Jack Fowler. It was, at that time, the first solved case on the Highway of Tears list. Investigators also named Fowler as a strong suspect in the deaths of Gail Ways, 19, and Pamela Darlington, 19, both of whom were murdered in 1973 within the same corridor. He was never conclusively linked to any others, though the RCMP said his travel patterns matched several. He had been present in British Columbia, he had a documented pattern of violence against women, and he was dead. The McMillan match was a breakthrough. It was also, for the families of the other victims, a reminder that the evidence to solve their daughters' cases might already exist, sitting in an evidence room waiting for a technology or a name that had not yet arrived. So where does that leave the rest? Where does that leave Ramona Wilson, whose mother demanded a proper investigation for 22 years? Where does that leave Delphine Nicol, still missing after more than 3 decades? Where does that leave the families who still drive to the roadside markers and lay flowers, hoping someone, somewhere, will finally speak? One of the most sobering documents produced about this case is the 2015 report from Human Rights Watch, titled "Those Who Take Us Away." It documented, through dozens of interviews, allegations of neglect and mistreatment of Indigenous women by police in northern British Columbia. In 2016, the Government of Canada launched the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Its final report, released in 2019, concluded that what had happened along Highway 16 was part of a broader national tragedy, one the inquiry described using the word genocide. That characterization was and remains debated politically. What is not debated is the number of families along that road who have been waiting, in some cases for over 50 years, for a phone call that has never come. A few practical things did change. In 2017, after years of advocacy, the province of British Columbia launched BC Bus North, a subsidized shuttle service along Highway 16 connecting Prince George, Smithers, Terrace, and Prince Rupert. Cell service was expanded along parts of the corridor. Highway signs were installed warning against hitchhiking. These are meaningful improvements. They arrived, in some cases, decades after the recommendations that first proposed them. But the deeper problem, the reason the Highway of Tears is not a single case but a pattern, has not been resolved. Indigenous women in Canada are murdered at a rate roughly 6 times higher than non-Indigenous women, according to Statistics Canada data. The road did not create that disparity. It only made it visible. If you drive Highway 16 today from Prince George out toward the coast, you will pass a series of red dresses hung from trees along the shoulder. They are part of the Red Dress Project, created by Métis artist Jaime Black. Each dress represents a missing or murdered Indigenous woman. There are hundreds of them. They flap in the wind above the ditches where some of the victims were found, and above stretches of highway where others were last seen. The dresses do not accuse anyone. They do not solve anything. They simply refuse to let the road forget. And that, more than any suspect profile or DNA match, is the real story of the Highway of Tears. It is the story of families who kept talking when nobody was listening, of a community that named the road themselves because no institution would, of a case file so long and so old that most of the leading suspects have died before answering for anything, of a country slowly and imperfectly being forced to look at a stretch of asphalt it drove past for 50 years without seeing. The RCMP still lists Project e-pana as active. Tips are still received. Evidence is still being tested against new databases as forensic technology improves. Every so often a name reemerges. Madison Scott, who disappeared from a lakeside campsite near Vanderhoof in 2011 and has never been found. Immaculate Basil, missing since 2013. Frances Brown, missing since 2017. The list does not close. It only grows longer and quieter and older. For the families, the work continues. Matilda Wilson, Ramona's mother, spent decades organizing walks along Highway 16 in her daughter's memory. She died in 2021 without ever learning who killed her child. Her walks continue without her. So does the road. If this case moved you, the most useful thing you can do is not let these names disappear. Share this video, say them out loud, and subscribe to Dark Cases. We cover a new investigation every week, and the next one is already in the works. Thank you for watching to the end.